What is up, Bitcoiners? I just had an amazing conversation with Zuby, the musician, content creator, author, podcaster, free thinker, sovereign individual, really just outright good guy. I think we spent a lot of time talking about, how people are controlled, how the coronavirus and the pandemic have really showed Zuby a lot about human nature. And to some degrees, he's both pessimistic and optimistic about human nature. He definitely sees a way forward. This is a really good conversation, just kind of diving into and teasing out the last 18 months. Zuby has been thinking about this a lot. And then we transition over to Bitcoin and decentralization and how this can help, right? This can move the needle away from just the totalitarianism that we've seen in 2020 and so far this year in 2021, and how Bitcoin and decentralization can move the needle for freedom. Zuby is very excited about what's happening in Bitcoin, but at the same time, he also has some pause, right? He thinks that there's more to it. He thinks that people need to get back to first principles thinking. I think you Bitcoiners are going to really like this podcast. I think you guys are going to really like Zuby. He's a great guy. If you haven't heard of him before, check him out at Zuby Music. But until then, enjoy this podcast with Zuby. Bitcoiners, I am sitting across the screen from Zuby, a legend on Twitter, musician, content creator, author, podcaster, so much more. Zuby, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here, man. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So I'm really excited to have you on here. I really want to talk about freedom and what's happening in the world today. You've had the position of kind of being in the UK and seeing things happen from one of the more strict and kind of gnarly countries in the West around the COVID lockdown. Can you just talk about your vantage point as, a citizen just living in the UK and looking around at your fellow citizens in the government?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, things right now are very different to how they were even just a few months ago. So for all intents and purposes, at least on a surface level, most things are back to a semblance of normal at the moment. So if you go out shopping or you're in shops and stuff like that, then people are still wearing masks. You still see some people out and about wearing masks on the street. There's even a handful of people still wearing them in the gym, etc. But if you were to go back just a few months ago from us recording this, then there was pretty much a third or fourth full-on lockdown. So, there weren't a lot of people out and about, just way more fear, everything closed, couldn't go to shops, couldn't go to the gym, couldn't do this, couldn't do that. Holiday, basically completely impossible to leave the country, basically. So right now, things are looking brighter than they were a few months ago. And throughout a lot of 2020, it's been a weird situation. So I don't want to be on sort of too much of a downer now. So for me personally, like a lot of the damage has already been done as far as I'm concerned. But with the way that things are right now, it's a big step up from where it was. But we're still not back to normal, and until we're totally back to normal, then I'm not gonna kind of, I don't think we should have ever changed that drastically from normal to begin with. All right, I didn't support the lockdowns from the very beginning. I was opposed to mask mandates from the very beginning. I've been against all of this stuff from the very beginning. I wasn't someone who was like, oh, let's do it for this long. I was like, no, I see exactly what's going to happen. I see exactly where this is going to go. And it all happened. It's all transpired. I was kind of hoping and praying I'd be wrong. And maybe, the government was a bit more benevolent and people weren't as naive as I thought they were. But I was proven wrong, I was proven right. But I didn't want to be proven right. But here we are.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a good transition. You had this epic thread, 20 things I've learned or had confirmed about humanity during the pandemic. You dropped this morning, and I mean, just your ability to construct content on Twitter is absolutely incredible. So that's going viral and doing fantastic. But I feel like there's just a level of kind of like honesty and truth to a lot of your content, which is why it strikes a chord with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all it is, man. I'm just honest. I'm authentic, and that's a pretty radical thing to be in this day and age, which is sad to me. especially given that we're supposed to live in the free world, we're supposed to be living in free countries, etc. We're supposed to have freedom of speech. People are supposed to be honest. Honesty is a virtue. That's how I was raised. We're supposed to be honest. We're supposed to be truthful, and at least try to tell the truth, right? I mean, there's some, you can express something and be wrong, but that's different from lying, right? That's different from actually telling a lie or going along with a lie. And I think that a lot of what we're dealing with right now in the West, not just with the corona thing, but even prior to it and with a lot of other issues, is people not being willing to tell the truth. There's a lot of fear. Some of it is somewhat understandable. Some of it is um, less so. But with all of it, I'm just true, and I'm just honest, and I'm authentic, and I'm myself, and that's what I do. I just try to articulate myself in a way that makes sense. It's no different to what I do as a rapper, right? I try to say stuff that I believe is honest, and what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing. And if I just have an interesting thought, like that 20 tweet thread you just mentioned, I was just thinking about it this morning. I mean, I've been thinking about this stuff all along, but I was like, oh, you know what? Like, let me just condense this into a whole bunch of thoughts and connect them together in this thread. I just put that out there. 4 hours ago, I think a million people have seen it already, which is amazing. But yeah, that's what I do. And a lot of people know me for that now. And whilst it's great sort of being able to sort of have that niche to some degree, um, I also just want to encourage more people to do the same thing, because it blows my mind how many millions of people, literally in the UK and the USA and Canada, Australia, supposedly free countries, are afraid to just say what is truthful, like what they know to be truthful, or if they don't know it to be truthful and it's just merely an opinion, people just still being terrified to voice basic opinions. I'm not talking about something supremely radical or extreme, just pretty basic stuff that people think but won't say.
Yeah, well, I mean, this wasn't struck on directly, but there's just a level of short-term thinking and first-order effect thinking that I feel like a lot of people have resorted to, and that was one of my big lessons. I don't really identify as in any political grounds, and other than maybe align with you, where it's just
Mm.
like do your own thing and don't bother others. But in terms of like pointing at, let's just say, a group of people, there's a level of kind of first order effect thinking that's just contagious around the left. That's only first order effect thinking, right?
Yes.
Like that every aspect of their policy is kind of around that, and it seems like that's just dominating the world today. You again, you kind of touched about the truthfulness aspect that is lacking in the world today, in these 20 things you learned. But do you want to just kind of dive into some of the specifics that about humanity that was particularly upsetting or saddening from your experience?
Over the last year and a half in particular?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the this is about the pandemic, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, it exposed a lot about human nature. I mean, if you go back and if we read history, right? Whenever you're reading history, certain aspects of it, whether you're looking at various rises of communism in Russia, China, Vietnam, if you're looking at Nazi Germany, if you're looking at the things like slavery and like, there's so much stuff in history where you just go, how did that happen, right? Like, how did that happen, right? German people are not like, I've been to Germany many times, right? Germans are chill, right? So how did your grandparents do this stuff? Or if they didn't do it, how did they go along with it? Why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they speak out? How were all of these tyrannical governments able to go on with things? How were people able to go on with slavery for thousands and thousands of years and not go, you know what, guys, like maybe this is wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this, right? Like, how were people so complicit in all of this stuff? I used to always ask these questions. And the darkest realization for me this year, or the past year and a half, has just been I 100% understand it now, right? And that is not to directly compare the events of the last year and a half to any of those incidents, but the psychological mechanisms, the desire for people to fit in, the fear of standing out or being ostracized, the fear of going against the grain, the fear of being punishment, being punished by some authority for saying what you believe to be correct or not going along with a lie, the authoritarian instinct, the blind trust people have in governments, all of that, right? All of these things combined has just let me totally understand, like, okay, that's how this stuff happens, right? It doesn't start with and anyone who does I think people who know sales and marketing have been somewhat less influenced by all of this propaganda because you can see it for what it is. I'm like, this is sales, this is marketing, these are upsells. This is right. It was do this. It was like, okay, just do
The
this. Just 2 weeks
vaccine
to
upsell.
yeah, just 2 weeks to slow the spread, right? How did this all start? 2 weeks to just 2 weeks to slow the spread and flatten the curve. Remember that, right? That's how it started, right? It wasn't like,
Yep.
hey guys, we want to lock down for a year and a half. It was okay. It's just this, and then it's just a mask. It's just this. It's just that. It's just that, right? And the next thing you know, there's people trying to freaking push mandatory experimental vaccinations upon people and trying to bar people from work or bar people from traveling if they haven't taken, their baptism shot, regardless of whether they've recovered or whether they're immune or if people are putting this on children now, right? Like, so we're just living in this
In
mass
Animals in the
delusion.
Zoo.
Animals in the Zoo. I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a story that was circulating this morning about them vaccinating lions, and they're
Good
moving on
grief.
to the primates next.
Right. So we're just living in this mass delusion and mass hysteria where it seems like everything which we knew prior to 2020 just got jettisoned very, very quickly, right? So all of a sudden, I've got people. I mean, again, this is mostly online. In the real world, people tend to be a bit more sane, but there's people out there calling me like I'm some kind of radical because I don't think the government should force people to stay at home or force businesses to close or force you to cover your face when you're in public or force you to take any medication, etc. Right? Like everybody agreed with me in 2019. Everybody agreed with me from 2019 before this, right? That wasn't anti-mask or anti-this or like that was just being a normal human being. If you went back to any person, liberal, conservative, whatever, in 2019, and you suggested to them some of the stuff that people are suggesting now, they would have been like, "No way, you're insane!" Right? Imagine if Trump came out and was trying to tell people, trying to force some of this stuff that people would be like, "Oh my gosh, I told you he was a fascist, Zuby, right? I told you
We're
he was a
gonna lock
dictator."
down the European border.
Yeah, exactly. You saw the criticism he had when he even did that. So people have lost their minds. Not everybody, but a lot of people have lost their minds. Some people are not going to come back. Um, some people are finally, the dominoes are tilting and they're realizing, okay, I've followed all of the orders. I've been very agreeable with all this. I took my shot. I wore my mask. I did this. I did that. I jumped through all the hoops. And we still have these restrictions, right? Despite the fact that we're down to single digit deaths per day and have been for several months in the entire country of 66 million people here in the UK, right? There's places in Canada now that are shutting down, and in Australia that are shutting down again where they have zero cases. They're locking down with zero cases, right? Like that's happening right now. So at some
Preventatively.
point, yeah. So at some point, it's like even the people who are the true believers are even getting to a point where at least privately they're like, okay, this is weird. There's something going on here, which is I've been trying to tell you, but yeah, I'd say that sort of realization of how those events ultimately happened in history and how and why people were complicit in them. I can totally understand the psychology behind that now. I always understood it to some degree, but I never witnessed it. I mean, what we've seen in the past 18 months is totally unprecedented in our lifetimes. Like we haven't seen anything like this before. And I'm not talking about the disease itself, right? Like I'm talking about the response to it and the authoritarian response and the mass hysteria. All of it would have actually made far more sense if we were actually talking about a super mega lethal virus, right? Like it would be at least more justifiable, right? It doesn't mean that it would be right, but you'd at least be able to be like,
So
okay, fair enough.
here's my pushback on that:
Okay, go
is
ahead.
that if that was the case, then I think it would also be a lot more voluntary,
I agree with you. I agree with you
right?
100%.
Like,
You wouldn't have to market it.
I mean, businesses, sent people home, and people were buying masks far before government mandates. And in fact, in the US, the Surgeon General said, don't wear masks because guess what?
Yes.
The government got caught flat-footed without masks, and we're trying to hoard it. Um, you know, at
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
during those moments of uncertainty at the beginning. So, like, it's all kind of just reactions and playing these kind of games. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think if it was really warranted, like the enforcement would be necessary. The market would.
I'm
People don't want to die.
I
You
agree with
know,
you, man.
people don't want to die.
I agree with you 100%, man. Human people are naturally self-preserving, right? You know, if there were an airborne disease just floating around outside, and I know, oh my gosh, if I go outside, there's actually like a 1% chance even that I'm gonna die just from like you don't need to tell me to stay home. You don't need to force me. You don't need to like, right? Like I know if there's a mask that actually works and will protect me, like I'll be the one freaking wearing a mask, right? Like, but in light of all we know and all we've known for literally more than a year now, it's like, okay, if you are under the age of 70 and you're generally healthy, with very rare exceptions, even if you do get the disease, you're going to be okay. Like you're going to be fine. You know, I actually got it in January and it's like, okay, cool. Like I felt bad for 4 days. I felt meh for 3 days and then I was totally fine. Cool. Right. Like, and I also assumed from the beginning with me, maybe this is another thing is like, I knew I was going to get it. Right. I was like, okay, like this is going to just run through the population and I'm out and about all the time. I'm meeting people. I'm traveling. I'm going to get this at some point, right? It's a given. Just like I get colds, and this is going to come. If I don't get it in 2020, I'm going to get it in the next year, or I'm going to get it the next year. And I assumed that literally from the very beginning. So I didn't have this like super mega. I mean, I'm not a neurotic person anyway, but I never had that. Oh my gosh, like I must avoid this at all costs. It was just like, okay, I'll just take basic precautions like I normally would because, you know, like you said, we're not out here trying to get sick. Like nobody is doing that. You know, I'll take whatever normal precautions necessarily. I'm not going to go overboard or whatever. And that was it. And in terms of the government forcing things, I was always, you know, I've never tried to force people not to wear masks or force people to go outside I'm not trying to force people to do anything. I'm just saying, guys, like, remember how we used to live life in January 2020? That's it. Like that's all I'm saying. Like do that. If you're still scared after all of this, even if you're vaccinated, you know, most of the people wearing masks now, I'm pretty sure, are even vaccinated, right? And it's like, you know, if you want to keep doing that, you can. I might think it's silly, but you can keep doing it and just leave everybody else alone. Simple.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like it's just a little harder than that because the fear is that your actions are going to affect everyone else, so
Yeah,
therefore
but
they have to take care of you. I don't want
uh-huh.
to get too stuck talking about like
Yeah,
you
sure.
know how to remedy the virus, but I think that fear to some degree is like the virus, right? And I think a lot of
Hmm.
Bitcoiners, push the narrative that fix the money, fix the world, that there's something actually wrong with like the structure that's giving centralized power the ability to exist, right? And I
Hmm.
would say like look at the difference between the US versus Canada and the UK and Australia, and it's decentralization versus centralization, the
Hmm.
ability to control people and not having the ability to choose which jurisdiction or which rules they're in to some degree. So
Yes.
not to say the US is perfect, but I've definitely seen that it it's better in terms of
Hmm.
choice. So I guess hand it back to you. Like, what do you think about these kind of ideas?
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the thing is, any situation like this, it gives us an opportunity to observe and stress test different ideas, right? So even within the USA, there's 50 states. So there were 50 different responses within the same country, at least 50 different responses across millions of people in response to the same threat. Okay. So you saw places like Florida pretty much all the way through be like, okay, you know, here are some guidelines, carry on with your life. Right. And then you saw places like, I believe, you know, California, New York,
I'm in California,
you're in California,
in
right?
San
You know,
Francisco. Yeah.
oh, okay, right. Much more, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but much more draconian, authoritarian response on a global level. You know, in Europe, we've got UK, but then you can also look at Sweden. You can look at Belarus. You know, you can on a wider level, you can look at countries in Africa and different countries in Asia, et cetera. Right? We've got like the whole world was responding to the same threat. So we saw everything from the super authoritarian approach to the full, you know, libertarian, actual, you know, what should be liberal approach of allowing people autonomy and letting them make their own decisions. Maybe offering them some general guidelines and then just saying, okay, like get on with things, right? And we've seen the result of that. And the result is that there's no correlation between lockdowns and mask mandates in terms of death and hospitalization rates versus not having them. So for all the people who are like these hardcore lockdown proponents, et cetera, you can even just look simply at the USA, look at all 50 states, and you see, okay, there's no correlation here, right? There's no correlation. So even if lockdowns or mask mandates were proven to, I don't know, make a 10% difference or even a 50% difference or whatever, like, I still wouldn't support them just because it's fundamentally um, opposed to the way I think things should be run, right? Like that's the government overstepping what it should be doing and getting out of pocket. So, as someone who's more, I think anyone who's more libertarian leaning, this is the thing with political philosophies, right? Is everyone has threat detectors, but the weightings of them are very different. So, people who are more libertarian leaning, your threat detector is for like government overreach, right? You're not there thinking of like, oh, yes, of course, there's the concern about like the virus itself and the impact of other things. But the first thing you really see is, yo, the government is getting out of pocket here. Like, what do you mean you can't hug your friends and your family? What do you mean you can't go outside? What do you mean this? Like that's your threat detector. Whereas it seems, I mean, it's been brought to light, right? People who are, more left or more progressive in general, speaking generally, their threat is, people, they were way more scared of the virus itself and scared of other people as well, right? And then people who are, people more right leaning, more conservative for whatever reason, it's like, okay, so everyone's responding to a threat, but what we even perceive as the threats are very different, right? Like, so I think with everyone, it was, especially when you learned early on, it's like, okay, this is something that really, over 90% of people dying are elderly people with pre-existing conditions. So we know, okay, if there's going to be a response, it shouldn't just be this blanket one size fits all thing, treating 5-year-olds the same way as you're treating 85-year-olds, which is what we've done and are still doing, which is absolutely insane, right? From early on, like about a month or two into this thing, I was like, okay, well, this data is out from all these different countries. So it's clear that we need to protect the people who need specific protection from the virus itself. And if there's going to be any vaccination or whatever, like these people need to be prioritized. But everybody else, get on with your life. Like get on with life. I mean, that should have been the message from early, and that would have stopped this whole economic collapse and all this unemployment and all these mental health problems that are like there's the fallout from the lockdowns has been insane, man.
All right, let's take a quick break from that episode. I want to tell you guys about our sponsor. It is Bitcoin 2022 conference. I am sure you saw the videos. You may have been there in person. Bitcoin 2021 was an absolute smashing success. It was the biggest conference in Bitcoin history, crypto history, whatever history of the digital asset sphere. Bitcoin is number one, and the Bitcoin 2021 conference is number one with a bullet. It was an absolutely incredible time. I was working my ass off the whole time, but I got to meet so many incredible community members. And I think the best testament to how amazing Bitcoin 2021 was not just all of the amazing, accolades and compliments that I got personally and our team got, but also it's the skin in the game in Bitcoin 2022. We have already sold close to 1,500 tickets. That is more than 10% of the people, everyone who went to Bitcoin 2021 have already purchased tickets to Bitcoin 2022. We have not released a date. We have not released a city. We have not released anything. That is the biggest compliment. That is the biggest skin in the game of the community being down for this conference. Bitcoin 2022 is going to be bigger than Bitcoin 2021. It is going to be better than Bitcoin 21 in every single way. And we are going to be bringing you the best opportunity to mingle with the biggest, the baddest, the most Bitcoin people on the planet. So join the revolution. Go to b.tc/conference. Get your tickets today. I don't know what the ticket prices are. They are going up. I think they're $249 right now. We just rolled out fiat ticket purchases. All the tickets purchased before today were all purchased in BTC. So get it, guys. Get it. Get this ticket. Be at Bitcoin 2022. See you there. Bitcoiners, I want to tell you guys about The Deep Dive. The Deep Dive is a new premium newsletter from the Bitcoin Magazine team in conjunction with my man, BTCization, Dylan LeClaire. Dylan is such a multifaceted and wide-ranging analyst. He does everything from on-chain analytics to macro analysis to hash rate and all that kind of good stuff. He does it all. He breaks down everything that's happening every single day with his daily dive. He's going to dive into what is happening in the market that day. So that way you don't have to pay attention to Twitter. You don't have to pay attention to anything else. You can just pay attention to the deep dive, and he has you covered. And at the end of the week, guess what? You get a weekly recap. And at the end of the month, hey, we have a freaking report, a beautiful PDF breaking down all the activity of that entire month, what it means for Bitcoin, what you can expect moving forward. The Bitcoin market is going to moon. We are here to make sure that we maximize your stack. Go to members.bitcoinmagazine.com to sign up today. And if you use promo code BITS, you can get 1 month for free. So again, the deep dive, I've been checking it out every day, and you should too. Back to the show. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I don't want to necessarily comment on like the right response. I definitely think we agree on like what has been the wrong response. I definitely think that no one talks about the fallout, the second, third order effects of the lockdown on
Oh
people.
gosh,
Like again,
I do.
because I mean, right, but like I feel like a lot of the proponents, they're still just picking and choosing their virus metric, and they're ignoring everything else, right? It's like almost like how economists measure GDP, right? It's like we're measuring GDP, make GDP go up, ignore everything else.
Yeah.
It's I feel like again like this, it really puts things into light. For a lot of people, 2020 was kind of like this big turning point, right? You mentioned like a lot of people kind of are going to go crazy and never come back, but for a lot of people, they're waking up, right?
Mhm.
And again, for folks like a guy like Michael Saylor, to them, like Bitcoin makes more sense. I think historically, since 2020, I think historically, you've been bullish on Bitcoin crypto, but have had a decent amount of skepticism as well, especially around adoption and potential for adoption and things like that. I'm kind of just curious, like, has 2020 impacted your view of Bitcoin and like the cryptocurrency space? Like, is it more needed based on kind of you seen like these governments like failing left and right? I guess hand
Yeah.
it back to you.
Yeah. I think as time goes on in general, even in the absence of what we've had over this past year and a half, as time goes on, the thing is, like, governments are just always disappointing me, right? Like, I have very low expectations of governments and government officials, right? Like, I've been not trusting them since it was cool not to trust them, um, for the most part, right? But the more and more you just see them flopping and lying and, doing malicious things all across the world. And we're like, we can see this now. We have the internet, especially, right? Like, you can see, like, you can see what's going on in the UK. You can see what's going on in Canada. You can see what's happening in New Zealand, Australia. So you're not thousands of miles away, but you can see it. So the more of that you see, if you already are skeptical and you already tend towards decentralization and aspects and ideas like Bitcoin, then yeah, I think all of these things further and further solidify your position, right? It blows my mind that there are people who have lived through this past year and a half, and they're like, "Do you guys know what we need? We need more socialism and more government control. Like, the government's it's not controlling our lives enough. That's the problem." And I'm like, "Are you just stupid, or are you absolutely delusional? Like, after the past year and a half, how is your idea we need more government control, right? Like, how have someone concluded that, right? That just shows how bananas some people are. Right? Maybe if you're 5 years old, I can see how you think that, but if you're a grown adult, how is that sort of blows my mind. I don't know how people are that delusional. I guess that's just stick to the ideology no matter what. But yeah, no, it's clear to me that the control needs to be more in the hands of the people. That includes money, that includes, decision making, just all this basic stuff. I mean, the thing again that's been mind blowing, and I don't even want to spend forever talking about this thing, but this notion that there's people on social media, there's people in the government, et cetera, that are pretending that they care more about you and your parents and your family than you do, right? No, they don't. Like, they don't even know who you are. They don't know who you're like, oh, this whole, oh, what about like, dude, like this strange, some random stranger on Twitter yelling at me about like my own protect. I'm like, bro, like you stop pretending you care more about my parents who are in their 60s and 70s than I do, or that you know better how to respond, or you know better than even they do, right? It's just like, no, if you want to, different people can have a different response to this thing. If someone willingly chooses, rightfully, wrongfully, I don't care, to take, extreme precautions because they're super duper scared of this virus or any other viruses, God bless you, man. You're welcome to. You're welcome to. My only problem has been this. No, it's not. Everyone else must do it, right? If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. You want to stay home, stay home. You want to take a vaccine, whatever. If you then run around trying to force other people to do the same under the threat of punishment, especially, you're trying to coerce people, you're trying to fire people from their jobs because they won't take it. Like all of that stuff, I'm just like, yo, like, stop. Like you have to draw the line and say, no, that's not right. The government should not be compelling this. People shouldn't be running around trying to force people to do all this stuff. It's so unprecedented. Again, if you just went back in 2019 and I mean, imagine going back in 2019 and just like asking a stranger, have you taken your flu jab? Like, like which flu jab have you said? People be like, what the heck is wrong with you? Get out of my face, right? Like now, but now people think that's normal and that's acceptable to ask complete strangers about their medical history and stuff. And I'm just like, no, man, like that's not the way forward.
I agree, right? But what I would say is like, 2019 wasn't good. 2019 was actually insanity, and it's just that we've escalated to a new level of insanity that it seems like that that insanity is
I
fine.
know.
And I would say like a lot of things were already broken, setting us up for this, right? And
Mm,
again, you can kind of look all the way down the stack, and again, like Bitcoiners would say, look at the money and look at the repo markets and all these things that are like kind of enabling the bankers and the elites and the government officials to kind of like maintain this apparatus. But you know, bringing it back to kind of like, let's say, second, third level, beyond just kind of the first order of like trying to convince people to behave differently is like, how do we, create a new incentive system? Like how do we enable people to have choice again, right? And I feel like again, that's why I'm personally into Bitcoin, and I
mhm,
think that's why Bitcoin Magazine does what it does, is because we believe that you should be able to know what you're getting into and opting into it, and that money is so foundational, right?
mhm.
So to some degree, it's like if they can't control you, if they can't, if they don't have the funds to pay people to us, take you down,
Mm.
then they can't do what they want to do. And I know again that there's a long road to that, but at the same time, you know, the need for it is just constantly growing as well.
Yeah, man. No, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's deep and humanity is flawed, man. This is just the thing, right? Humanity is, I love human beings. Like I have deep, deep love for human beings. But we're just a flawed species and always have been, right? Look at history, look around the world. You see all types of benevolence and kindness and love and altruism. And you also see the most horrible, awful things that humans are capable of. All right. And I think, like I say, with something like Bitcoin, I mean, I've been into Bitcoin since 2017. I heard about it earlier, but 2017 is when I really got involved. And I think the financial system and the economic system is certainly a key part. And again, if you, like you were saying, go second, third, fourth order behind the scenes, like that's kind of the mechanism through which a lot of this stuff works for. Um, but I think that, and I know people who are super Bitcoin evangelists and maxis like to use the phrase "Bitcoin fixes this" for virtually everything. And I think Bitcoin does fix quite a few things, but it doesn't fix everything, right? It doesn't fix the fact that we are a fallen we are a fallen species, and that we have um, human beings are just fundamentally flawed and are wired towards various sins, you know, greed, selfishness, jealousy, envy, gluttony, malice, anger. Like that just exists, right? No matter what system you have, that always exists. The funny thing with a lot of ideas when people talk about systems is that on paper, on paper, most systems sort of work, right? I think this is why you get, a lot of academics with these. Most of the worst ideas come from academia, right? And I think that's why you still have, people who are otherwise intelligent who are still convinced that, communism is a great idea because, they just haven't done it quite right, Like how many, no matter how many millions of bodies stack up, they're still just like, people will keep being communists, right? And I think that's largely because uh, when you remove the human element, it can sound like it would work, right? If someone if you explain the concept of communism to like a 6-year-old, they'll be like, oh, so everyone has enough. Oh, no, so no one is yeah, that sounds good, right? That sounds good, that sounds fair. And with that's the thing with most systems, like it sounds, when you when you hear people, defund the police or abolish the police, right? Like it sounds like a good idea on paper to certain types of people. They're like, oh, actually, well, yeah, maybe if we just, invest in social workers instead, then maybe it's like, dude, like you're forgetting the human element. You're not thinking about the actual human element here. So I think that's it's an age old problem, right? And we've never totally worked it out. I think we've done the best that any and any members of our species have done so far. The world is a much safer, less hostile, less full of every ism and phobia than it ever was before, especially if you live in the West. But still, we've still got big problems. We've still got big problems, and even when certain things get solved, people then create more of them again because people are flawed, or they'll literally go out of their way to create new problems. And it seems to be something we're dealing with a lot now. I think a lot of the problems and things people are talking about right now in society are very much manufactured, right? They're not genuine threats like our ancestors had to deal with. These are threats that have been artificially created and artificially hyped.
Before we get back to the episode, I want to tell you guys about Bitcoin Magazine. Bitcoin Magazine is the oldest publication covering Bitcoin, and we've been covering Bitcoin since 2012. Y'all, I'm so proud to be working for Bitcoin Magazine. We spend all day trying to scour the internet for the top news, the top plebs, the top subjects, conversations, everything that has to do with BTC, the asset, BTC, the culture, BTC, the revolution. We are here for it. We are here for BTC and BTC only, and we want to give back to the Bitcoin community. Hit us up if you want to contribute, and go follow us on Twitter. Go subscribe to this podcast. Go follow us on YouTube. All of the places that you can find Bitcoin Magazine, we are there. Instagram, Reddit, everywhere. We're there. We're there. Follow us for the best Bitcoin knowledge. Back to the episode. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I tend to agree with a lot of what you said. I'm kind of curious if you have heard or read either of these books. This is The Fourth Turning.
I have heard of it. I haven't read it.
And then this one's the Sovereign Individual.
I'm going to read them. And every Bitcoin podcast I do, they tell me I need to read it. So I'm going to. I'm reading through, I'm reading Atlas Shrugged right now. So that's taking up the space of that's as long as 8 normal books. So once I get through that,
I haven't even read that one yet, but okay. I know it's mandatory reading. Yeah, it's hard to get through all the Bitcoin books, but so I mean, the whole point of both The Fourth Turning and The Sovereign Individual is kind of this idea of you're right. There's this human nature about people, and the human element matters, right? And then at the same time, how does technology impact that? And both of these books kind of have a very interesting take on how generations and technology and in the Sovereign Individual's book case, violence kind of impacts how humanity kind of organizes over time. And really what I just see is there's this world that's coalescing around technology, and that technology actually gives people back their freedom. And Bitcoin's a huge part of that. And, we're seeing things break down in let's just call it the centralized world, in the fiat world. But we're also kind of seeing the glimpses of hope, hopefully on the internet. At the same time, the internet could also be this, panopticon China style control mechanism. So it's this battle. So I don't know. It's we're about to be on this kind of like battle for the future. And you're right, like there's this human element, but I would say that Bitcoin has been in the wild, right? Bitcoin,
Mhm.
it's not like on paper. It's actually like this thing, and now we're seeing El Salvador. We're seeing all of this kind of stuff like playing out. I'm just kind of interested, like forward looking, like how do we actually win this battle, right? Like you've been fighting the war of ideas for a long
Mm,
time. I
mm.
would say libertarians have been I don't know, fighting or playing the political game for a long time, but like how do we win, right? How do we go from like, hey, stop imposing on my rights to like, you know, like actually being defendable? I feel like that's where
It's a
Bitcoin comes in, personally for me. But I'm
yeah.
curious what you think.
I think Bitcoin is a fundamental. Think Bitcoin is a part of it. You know, Bitcoin is a part of it because society has various concepts and important constructs in it, of which obviously money and finances are a major one. Um, but it's again, it's not everything, right? If this money system is corrupt and deeply flawed and over time has become debased, then I think it's important to return that back towards do you know what I think we need? I think we need to go back to first principles on a lot of things, right? I think people need to think, okay, people in the USA, right? What is the US government supposed to do? Like what's its actual job? Like go back to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Like what is actually what's the purpose of government? Is it just meant to be this machine that just generates money and gives me everything that I want? Right? I just want something and then the magic money just like that's what some people think the government is now. Right? That's what some people even in the USA, which is like a country that was truly founded on freedom and liberty and capitalism, right? That's even what some people over there think, right? The government is just, a daddy who just gives me money. It's just give me at least $1,000 a month for sitting on my butt doing nothing, and it should, give me a house, guarantee me a job. And I'm like, bro, that is since when? Since when is that the job of the government, right? Like, I'm not even an American, and I'm like, that's not the job of the U.S. government. So I think we need to go back to first principles on everything. What is money? Like what is money? Where does it come from? Where does its value come from?
But
So on and so forth. Yeah.
so pushing back though, I don't think like you talk about human nature. I don't think humans are going to go back to first principles. I think it's all incentives, so like they
Yeah.
have to be forced to, right? I would say Bitcoin is forcing people to look into like what is money. It's like the first real conversation about it in a long time. But like no one's going to go back to the first principles about government. Like they don't like no one's going to go
I
to the first principles of what capitalism is. People hear like, oh,
I
capitalism
don't
failed, blah blah blah. I'm
I
like,
don't know about that. I don't know about that. I'm not convinced that people won't. I just think that honestly, like a lot of people are ill educated, right? Like a lot of people are not like they're not even learning this stuff to begin with. I mean, people used to learn this stuff, right? People used to learn in school, okay, like what's the role of government? What happened in history? What's this? What's that? Like you'd learn those basics. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been in school, so I don't know exactly what they're teaching kids these days. Beyond critical race
it's
theory
not
and other
good.
nonsense. Yeah. So I think those things need to. And yeah, I mean, I think again, decentralization is key to this. I think decentralization in education is important and is something that has already happened, but I think it's going to become way more disrupted. I think that's a big shift actually that's going to happen in our lifetimes that has started but hasn't totally started, right? And I think it's perhaps it'll actually be accelerated. Maybe that's something positive that'll come out of the past year and a half, right? A breaking away from the old models, having more people working from home, working remotely and being able to spend more time with their families and have more freedom, not being forced to live in massive urban centers, which are very, very expensive and congested and polluted. Maybe people can move out and save money, less traffic, all of that. Maybe those are some good things that can come. People realizing, okay, there's other ways that people can learn, like, you know, guys like us who are internet savvy, we've known for a while that you can learn online and a lot of people didn't know Zoom existed prior to 2020, right? So all of a sudden, even the boomers are learning, oh wow, okay, we can actually do things in a different way here. So I think those are some positive shifts that are going to come out of the past year and a half. And so I think that with that, I mean, it's all it's all decentralization. And I think even that, it's being enabled by the technology, right? But to me, that's sort of that's also a response to, sorry, it's also a return to somewhat first principles in that sense to me, because again, people have now, over the past decades, when people think of education, they think of school and they think of university, right? That's not what education is. You don't have to go to university to be educated, right? Like education, it's learning, right? There's lots of ways that you can learn. You don't have to, going to work or working doesn't have to mean that you're sitting inside an office in a specific building, right? It can mean something else. Like it can mean what we're doing or some sort of variation of it. Money doesn't have to mean this printed piece of, I know it's not actually paper, but this printed piece of paper. Um, it can mean, and it doesn't have to come from. I mean, again, because if you go back, it's interesting because it's a step forward and a step back, right? Something like Bitcoin, because if you look back at old, like ancient money, it wasn't a government issued fiat currency, right? It was, some item people can use to trade, whether it's salt or shells or beads or, some crop or whatever it is, right? Like that was what was considered money. People are in the prison system, they use like cigarettes and stuff, right? Um, and
Stamps
so
too.
Stamps, yeah. So Bitcoin is like a new technology. So it's a step forward in that way, but also it's kind of a step back again, going away from that pure massive state government model, central bank model, and going, oh, actually, money doesn't have to be like Bitcoin is money, right? You have people like, oh, Bitcoin is it's not real money because they've been so brainwashed essentially over the past decades to think that money is only money if it comes from the Fed in the USA, right? Or if it's printed by, who's it prints money here? Is the Bank of England, I think. That people are so wired to think that's the only form of legit money. And it's like, oh, actually, that's not fundamentally what money is. It doesn't have to be that. So I think we're at the same time, we're sort of doing this interesting thing where we're moving forward with the technology, but that technology is actually enabling us to kind of go back to those first principles of what the thing was originally supposed to be. I think that's happening going to happen in education, in finances, and perhaps in some other areas as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm hoping that it also kind of brings us back to a model where people could move around the globe without necessarily having to be surveilled. I feel
Mm,
like people forgot that before World War II, the globe a lot more, our borders were a lot more fluid. And
mm,
people could kind of move around. They didn't need necessarily a passport and this kind of like surveillance. And I'm hoping that it's the dream of the sovereign individual is that, Zuby will be able to be like, hey, I'm going to go to this place because this place offers me these benefits that matter for me.
mm.
And, you don't necessarily have to be stuck in the UK or in whatever jurisdiction you happen to be born in.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting out of here soon.
So, Zuby, this has been an awesome conversation. I guess on that note of, getting out of the UK, like, what's next for you on your pursuit to be a sovereign individual in this day and age?
Wow, man. Well, first of all, I'm going to pat myself on the back for achieving a lot of the things that I've been trying to achieve for the past decade plus. Um, I've now been self employed for almost 10 years. And in the past couple of years, I've gotten myself to a position where I'm location independent. So I don't need to be, a big goal for a long time has been, or I don't want to be tied to any city or country and totally rely on that for my income and everything like that. So I've reached that goal now. So as we record this, I'm in the UK right now, but I don't have to be, right? I could be doing this from anywhere. I can do the vast majority of what I do from anywhere with an internet connection. So I'm going to be exploring that a lot more and physically traveling a lot more, geographically and just going around the world a lot more. I've got my new album, which is coming out. So it's sort of half out right now. It's available at my website, teamzuby.com exclusively. but in August it'll go out on the wider digital platforms like iTunes, Spotify, etc. Um, I'm gonna have, more live events, more podcasts and interviews, more books, more tours. Like I already do everything that I want to do, man. Like I'm blessed and I've worked hard to get to where I am. So I already am much more of a sovereign individual, shall I say, than the average person. Because before I had ever even heard that specific term, I've been working on that since my early 20s to get to a point where like I left the corporate world at 23 and did not. I was like, I'm gone. Like this isn't a short term decision. Like I don't want to spend my life doing this. Like I worked that out very early. I didn't even, and I was just like, no, I'm gonna go and I'm too creative for this. I'm too entrepreneurial. I'm gonna go do my own thing. So I'm doing that already. I'm gonna keep doing it, and I want to help and inspire and encourage other people, not to necessarily do the same thing that I do, but to tilt more in that direction, right? Everybody has ideas. Everybody does have creativity. Not everybody's an entrepreneur per se, but everyone does have some entrepreneurship spirit in them. Most people can be more free, can have better control of their minds, their finances, their bodies, all of that. So their brains, like their thinking, you don't need to be locked into this matrix of, there's one opinion on everything, right? Like I want to free people's minds. It's why I love Twitter. It's why I love podcasts. It's why I like these conversations, because I'm not big on telling people I'm big on telling people what to think. I'm big on telling people to think. Right? Like I'm not here trying to lecture everybody. Like you must believe, this is what I believe, so you have to go. I'm just like, yo, like just think. Like don't just sit there in front of a television like a vegetable and take everything at total face value and not question anything. And oh, you see five people running off a cliff, so you just decide to run off. It's like, no, like think, work out what makes sense, question things, challenge things, have conversations. Don't be so afraid of being canceled or this or that you literally are a hostage and you can't do anything, you can't say anything. Like you're supposed to be a free person. We're free people. We're not slaves. So
Well,
let's
yeah,
keep it that way.
Not to interrupt you, and I think
Mm,
you're right, and this is why again, like I push the incentives. It's like you had to put yourself in a position to do that, and that took work. It didn't come out of nowhere that
mm,
you made yourself uncancelable and anti-fragile. That you have a
yes.
platform, a diversified platform across things. Like it's very strategic and monotonous and consistent work, right?
Hmm.
And most people just aren't in that position. So, like, yeah, you want them to think, you want them to be independent, you want them to break out of this fiat wage slave mentality, but it's
Yeah, to
hard, right?
some
They
to
need
some
tools.
degree, man. Like to some degree, like I have no delusion that everyone is gonna, everyone's wired differently, man. And most people are not entrepreneurs, so I don't expect. I'm not here like everyone needs to quit their job and just go off and make money on the internet, right? I'm like, that's not feasible. But I want people to see, okay, maybe even if it's someone who's someone working a 9 to 5 corporate job or whatever, right? Even if it's just them, I don't know, making an extra $5,000 a year by you know, promoting something online or like doing this just a little bit more. I mean, dude, the amount of DMs and emails I get from people who work in all sort of sectors, from average Joes to like ultra celebrities, who are messaging me, who are just like, yo, like I love the fact that you talk on this or you speak out on this. Like I agree with you, but like I'm worried about this or I'm scared of that. Like everybody's just living in fear, 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 fear. And I'm like, man, just be a little bit more bold, a little bit more confident. It doesn't mean you have to doesn't mean you have to share every single thought that crosses your mind, or you need to be like, super controversial or this or that. It's just like, look, if everyone just takes a little step in any direction, the world does shift. Right? We've seen this many times. We've seen it over the past year and a half, right? We've seen how quickly things can shift, right? People take a step in that one direction, and all of a sudden, whoosh, like we've got a real big change because millions and millions of people have done it. So we
Yep.
can do that in a more freedom oriented direction. Even if we go back to Bitcoin, right? I'm not saying, hey, everyone go out and buy a whole Bitcoin, right? But what if everyone What if everyone just bought like a little bit, right? If everyone just bought a little bit. So everyone now is at least slightly, very, very slightly invested in this idea and owns a little bit of decentralized money, right? Like just that little drip en masse could be a very significant shift. And that's actually what happens with Bitcoin, right? It's like, it's a whole bunch of people, people come across this thing, and then most people who buy Bitcoin don't own a whole one, right? Most people just get like a little fraction, but that takes them down this rabbit hole. And then suddenly they're listening to this podcast and they're reading the Bitcoin Standard and they're reading these other, and they're like, oh, so that's how money works. Oh, actually, this is deep, right? And that's that little rabbit hole everybody goes down. Anyone who's in the Bitcoin world knows that there's a rabbit hole that they've been down, and you don't just stay at the surface. You tend to see one thing or have a conversation, and then you're like, okay, let me look into this more. Okay, let me read that book. Let me listen to that podcast. And then you're like, and then an event like has over the past year happens, and then you're like, okay, right. So governments do that. Interesting, right? And then you've seen, how many trillions has the U.S. government printed over the past year? Oh boy, what's that going to do for inflation? And so again, it's taking stuff out of the academic and into the real world where you're now seeing, like, we can read stories about inflation in the past, but again, if you live in the West and you're young, you've never lived through a proper economic depression or like hyperinflation. Or like, you can talk to older people and they'll be like, oh my gosh, like it was like this, But fortunately, we've been so lucky that we haven't seen it. But you can at least see, you can see how it happens, and you can also see how it can be avoided. And you see how, okay, maybe I shouldn't keep maybe I should put 100% of my money just in the bank, right? Maybe I should buy a little bit of Bitcoin. Maybe I should buy a little bit of gold even, or I should do this, or I should do that. So I think anything that tilts people just a tiny bit in that direction, even if it's a fraction of a percent, then I think on a large scale, it makes a big difference down the line.
Totally. And I think we agree. And that's personally why I'm a Bitcoin advocate, because it's something that people can do. I also think it makes people more anti-fragile, right? Like you are a shining example of a beacon of anti-fragility in this, in this fiat world, right? And you're about to become more anti-fragile when you diversify your geography. And there's techniques to do that in a very, strong way, getting other citizenship, stuff like that. But Bitcoin is something easy, just stack sats, right? Buy a little bit of Bitcoin. It's something that anyone can do to free themselves a little bit and make themselves a little bit less cancelable. So I think that it in a big enough scale, it does make a huge difference. Zuby, it was really great to have you on the show. We went down a lot of rabbit holes on this one, and I think you'll be excited to know that part of my Bitcoin rabbit hole was discovering Zuby music. So Bitcoin is how I discovered you. And I hope that this podcast helps a lot of other Bitcoiners discover, your thoughts and the content that you're putting out, and, continue thinking, because I feel like a lot of Bitcoiners are on the front lines of critical thought and exploring, new potential, new opportunities.
I know, Dom. I really, really appreciate it, man. Great conversation.
Zuby, I think you plugged your website already, but, just go through the standard. Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, sure thing. So zubymusic.com. You can check out my music, podcast, merchandise, links to everything there. And if you want to follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all of them at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. Follow me.
All right, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. To all the podcasts or Bitcoiners out there, you can follow me at CK_Snarks. You can follow the podcast at Bitcoin Magazine. Give us those 5-star reviews. You know what to do. Peace. A quick reminder that all of the content in this episode is for informational and entertainment purposes only. You should not construe the information as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. Nothing contained in this presentation constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, or offer by BTC Media, the Let's Talk Bitcoin Podcast Network, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell securities or any other financial instruments. Do your own research.